Senator Lisa Murkowski, thank you for joining the Dispatch podcast.
Good to be with you this morning. I guess morning your time, afternoon DC. But yeah, good to be with you, Jamie.
Wonderful to have you, Senator. There's so much going on, but I want to start with your book. Why now? What is the reason that you put this out now and not 5 years from now, or not 5 years earlier than now?
Oh yeah. So I've been working on it really since 2010. So a lot of people are saying it's about dang time, right? There's never a good time to write a book. I've decided that, particularly in a work environment like ours, where things are evolving every day. You don't really know when to stop the story. But I started in earnest about 5 years ago when I met up with an old friend from Alaska, and we were talking about my write-in back in 2010. And he says, Lisa, you've got to share that story. You've got to write a book. And I'm like, Charles, I do not have time to write a book, and I don't know how to write a book. And he says, well, that's what I do. So thus began a great friendship and a great collaborative. But it took a long while. It's not like I have a lot of extra time in my day, but I really did feel like I had a story that was relevant at the time and continues to be relevant today, about offering perhaps a little slight glimmer of a hope in a political environment that just seems to be increasingly divided and more toxic. I don't know whether I am a dinosaur or the beginning of something that's going to build, but I do find that we're operating in an environment where people want to know that there is more than just kind of the partisan party rhetoric, and that maybe you can make a difference in the process. So it's a little bit evergreen from that perspective.
Was there any part of the book that was particularly difficult to write, a section that, was about something in your life that you kind of walked away from, but ultimately came back to writing it, that you found that may be more difficult than the rest of the book?
Yeah, I think the hard parts were really trying to communicate the thought process of some of the very difficult issues that we faced at a time when there are consequences, right? Consequences to an impeachment vote, consequences with the confirmation of a Supreme Court nominee, and I think those were the parts where it was hard to articulate out loud kind of the thought process that I went through, and then to read it and to just kind of ask the question, well, okay, does it am I conveying what I'm hoping to with this passage? I talk a lot about the need to respect and honor the institutions that are holding us together. Why I think a balanced a balance within the branches is important. Why I don't think that the Supreme Court should cross into the legislative or the executive to the legislative. The easy parts of the book, quite honestly, were the ones that really came from my heart, which bring it back to Alaska. The thing that centers me, grounds me, and excites me. These are all hard things that we're working on in the Alaska space. Everything's a little more complicated or complex because we've got such big geography and small people and a great diversity. But those were the sections of the book that just seemed to just flow with an ease, and still my favorite parts of the book.
The thing that struck me the most, and I thought you might mention it as more of the difficult parts, but maybe it wasn't difficult, are kind of the personal anecdotes of things that you struggled and overcame. You talk about your bar exam where you didn't succeed at the first go, or when you were appointed to the Senate, questions of whether are you really legitimate because you were appointed by your father. Not legitimate, it's not the right word, but the questions you had there. What do you think lessons are there for those who are reading the book? Obviously, you've now served in the Senate for a long time. You've, in terms of anybody can say, succeeded mightily, but you did have these struggles, or at least struggles of questioning,
Okay, Jamie, it dropped. Oh, there
identity.
you go.
What do you think those lessons are in the book?
Well, I think that the takeaway there is that your elected leaders, whether they're in the United States Senate, whether they're in the Alaska State Legislature, or whether they're in the PTA, they're real people. They have real fears. I tell about just my my real sense of inadequacy in the early years in the Senate, when I didn't feel like I was a good enough mom because I was 4,000 miles away from my kids. I wasn't a good enough wife because my husband was now having to pick up the burden of parenting. And because I didn't have enough hours in my day, I was probably not a good enough senator. And as elected representatives, nobody wants to admit to a sense of weakness, that I am not invincible, that I can't handle this on my own. We want to project this air of confidence. And so I think it is sending a message that, yes, we are all real. We have our fears. We don't share them every day, but we do have them. I mentioned some of my struggles. We mentioned the bar as a specific example. And I speak about that very, very openly. At the time, man, raw, open wound. I didn't want to talk about it with anybody. But I learned as I have moved through that experience, it was not the failure that defined me. It was what I did with that failure. Did I give up? No. Did I double down? Absolutely. Not only did I commit, pass the bar after multiple attempts, I get it. But then I said, nobody should have to go through this kind of a process. What can I do to help others? So, for the next 2 years, I was engaged in on my own spare time, trying to help others who were struggling with that lack of confidence. And so it is important that people understand that not everybody who gains higher office walks into this position with they were the star athlete. They dated the most perfect person. They had the highest GPA, and they were all brilliant. That's intimidating. Nobody wants to insert themselves into that venue if you think everybody else is perfect and you're a flawed human being. Well, you know what? We're all flawed human beings. It's what we decide that we're going to do with that that makes a difference. And so I think I was okay being vulnerable. Now, having said that, now I got a book out. Now people want to talk to me about it, and there is that vulnerability. It's hard. It's hard.
Well, Senator, as you speak and as your book is coming out, some major consequential things are happening in the world, things that you will decide on in the Senate, at least in part. As we speak, President Trump is considering entering the conflict with Iran, perhaps just with airstrikes, or perhaps seeking something greater. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think I am in an extraordinarily good and broad company in saying we do not want to be engaged in these endless wars. I recognize and respect the the determination of Israel, the right to defend themselves. What we're seeing unfold, literally by the hour, is causing us all, I think, great concern about what happens next. I think that President Trump has given a pretty strong signal to Iran that if they want to avoid serious and significant consequences, they they can move to address that. They can avert this, um, but we cannot allow Iran to 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 move to nuclear enrichment. And I think that has been clear. And so how we move forward, the role of the Congress going forward. There's a lot of discussion about moving to invoke war powers. That will be a subject for us in these truly next few days. Um, we don't know what the president may do. We don't know if it will be a strike or if it will be um, a more direct engagement, um, or if any of this happens. So it is very tenuous, um, and it is the stakes and the consequences, I think we all recognize, are extraordinarily high.
There's a debate whether the president is authorized to strike without going to Congress
Right.
through the powers of the AUM passed after 9/11. Do you believe he has the authorization to authorize a strike without Congress? And even if you do you think he should take it to Congress first? Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, we have seen the presidents uh, authorize strikes on different enemies, um, and I think the difference is whether or not it is one targeted strike, uh, or if it is something that would then put American troops on the ground. Uh, that I think brings it to a different level. I think the public feels, and I don't want. I'm gonna dial that back because I've seen a couple very quick polls on where's the American public right now on what should happen in Iran, and I think we are still trying to gain a sense of that. But I do think that there are more that are of the view that Congress should play a greater role because that allows them, the the constituents, our constituents, to feel like they have a more immediate path to express their views. So I I think we will have this discussion, this debate about war powers. I would like to think that it is not something. It's not a discussion that happens after after action by the president.
Do you have a view that if the U.S. does engage, whether it should be limited to striking Fordo or other targets from the air, or whether the policy of the United States should be regime change, because the belief would be that no matter what you leave in place, that this regime will try to reconstitute a nuclear weapon?
Well, and that is the debate. What is the mission here? And again, we don't want to be engaged in a forever war. What is the mission here? Is the mission to eliminate the ability to move forward with uranium enrichment? If that's the case, I think the target is certainly made more clear. If it is broader regime change, what does that entail? One of the things that we do know for certain, Iran gains its wealth. They have the ability to have the war response that they do because of their oil wealth, and so is there greater targeting towards refineries, to basically bring Iran to a place where they are no longer able to not only have the weaponry that they need, but also the resources that they would need, to again move towards nuclear ambition. So I think this is something that the president needs to articulate, is what that mission is. And I think you've seen in just the recent days that debate going back and forth. And I don't believe that President Trump has indicated one way or another what his view is on that.
I think you framed the issue very well, Senator. But this seems to be a very fast-moving issue, that this is going to happen
Yeah.
the next few days if President authorizes a strike. I don't know if he's going to seek congressional approval, but if it was brought to Congress today, where do you stand on a strike? Where do you stand on regime change? How would you vote?
You make it sound like it's an easy choice, because a strike is defined to us. What regime change means is defined to us, and I don't think we have that. If it is a strike that is a targeted strike, and it could move to cripple Iran's abilities, in the war theater as they're attacking Israeli targets, then and help to dismantle their nuclear capabilities. Do I think that the president, if he needed to move that quickly and is not able to gain the support or talk to members of Congress, I think that is a situation that we have seen before. It is different than if it is more than just a targeted strike at an Iranian asset, by U.S. Assets, versus a decision and a determination to move U.S. forces in to Iranian soil, or not into Iranian soil, but into the area there.
One more question on Iran. There has been discussion in some public information of arrests related to Iranians supposedly trying to hire someone to assassinate the president of the United States, but also other high-ranking officials from the past Trump administration. In an interview yesterday, Ted Cruz seemed to suggest that members of the Senate, have seen more information regarding this. Have you seen information regarding Iran attempting to assassinate U.S. leaders, including the president?
I have not, and I didn't see exactly what Senator Cruz had said. I'd gotten kind of a brief highlight, but no, I have not. I have not been privy to any of that information. And again, we as members of the Senate have an opportunity for certain classified information as things are moving forward. I think it's appropriate to note that we will be having a Senate members meeting, a bipartisan meeting next week on the situation in Iran. My hope is, as you have suggested, things are moving so quickly. My hope is that that briefing will be in time to give the information to us, and that we are not looking at things in past tense here.
Another major issue domestically is the big, beautiful bill that the president calls that he's trying to get through Congress. His goal remains, according to the White House, to get it passed by the Senate by July 4th. Is that a realistic possibility?
It's hard. I'll just tell you, it's hard. We are here. We're here on a federal holiday. The House is out. The Senate is out. We're not back in until Monday. Basically gives us 1 week to execute this. And I think I would not be revealing any confidential negotiations in saying that there is so much that is still in process before we are able to get to the point of being able to take this bill to the floor. Whether it's committee language that is still being worked, matters that are being debated, argued before the parliamentarian. Until all that happens, we don't even have a bill. People keep asking me, well, how are you going to vote on the bill? That bill is still being defined, as you and I are discussing. And so your question is a fair one. Leader Thune has been very committed to the goal. The president has made clear this is what he is seeking. In fairness, I would much rather have better policy come out of the Congress rather than trying to adhere to an arbitrary timeline. And so if it takes us beyond the 4th of July to get better policy that works for more Americans, that's what I think we need to be focusing on, not what's it going to take to get enough votes so that we can move this thing out before the 4th of July to keep that commitment. I'd rather keep the commitment to the American people that says we're going to deliver to you a tax policy that you can rely on, count on, whether you're an individual, a small business, where we're going to make sure that as a Medicaid beneficiary, you're not going to bear the burden of being pushed off of necessary health care. I want to make sure that we're trying to do right by our policies and the investments that we've made, whether it's on the energy side, whether it's what we need to do in defense or border or elsewhere. So can it be done by the 4th? Enough political muscle and things happen. I think it's a little harder on the Senate side than it is on the House.
You mentioned Medicare, and I know that's been one of your concerns about the bill.
Medicaid.
Medicaid.
Yeah.
My question is, given the debt problem, do you see that as a concern? And if it is, how would you cut it other than either reforms or cuts to entitlement programs, given that they are by far the major and largest source of the long-term debt problem that we have?
Well, and do we need to? We keep talking about what it means to bend the curve on some of the entitlement programs. Medicaid, perfect example. We are seeing the numbers escalate and in a trajectory that that does really jeopardize, compromise us when we're looking at debt and deficit issues. So is it something that we have an obligation to be reviewing, exercising the oversight? Waste, fraud, and abuse is not just a catchy phrase. It's a congressional responsibility that we have. And so let's try to understand if there are areas where we can not only eliminate some of that, but again, to the point about being able to bend that curve a little bit. But how do you do it in a way that doesn't harm the most vulnerable? In many of our states, certainly Alaska, we've got about 40% of our kids in Alaska that are Medicaid beneficiaries. We have so many of our seniors, our most vulnerable, are on Medicaid. Do I want to see them cut from Medicaid when their options, their ability to gain access to coverage is the only alternative for them is the emergency room? No, I don't want to do that. So I want to make sure that what we're doing and how we're doing it is smart and makes sense. But I also recognize that we have a lot of discussion about what goes on the discretionary side of the budget and spending there, but the real cost drivers are on the entitlement side. So is it legitimate? Is it right that we should be looking and evaluating the programs? Absolutely.
Let's follow up on that. I mean, you mentioned waste, fraud, and abuse. Obviously, Elon Musk uh, went into Doge saying just through waste, fraud, and abuse of all the programs in government, I'm going to cut $2 trillion a year, then $1 trillion a year. Then it's unclear if he's maybe cut anything at all, or
Right.
if it's 10 billion, which would suggest to me that there's not enough waste, fraud, and abuse to make a significant dent. So, is there? Do we need to raise the age of certain eligibility with Medicare? I mean, what are some of the things that we can do to actually cut the debt and reform entitlements that would allow us to do that?
Okay, well, to use a specific example when it comes to Medicaid, when we when we moved towards Medicaid expansion some years ago, you brought in a different population to the existing Medicaid population. So those children, pregnant women, disabled, that population. All right, now we're adding in an expanded population that brought in basically able-bodied men. All right, so you now have an add-on in many, not all states, but in many states with your expanded Medicaid population. What we are talking about now, or what is being discussed within both the House bill and the Senate bill, is work requirements for the able-bodied population. So we're not talking about disabled, we're not talking about the pregnant woman, we're talking about the able-bodied. Is that reasonable to expect that you have to meet certain work requirements in order to gain those Medicaid benefits? I think if the opportunity is there, I think it is not unreasonable that we should expect those to be able to meet certain work requirements. Now, in the same time I'm saying that, I'm sharing with those that are working through the contours of this bill that we've got some challenges in Alaska because we have areas of the state where we don't really have jobs to speak of in the cash economy definition. The jobs that are out in a rural native village may be providing for the sustenance of people in the community. You go out and you're the hunter, you're the fisherman, you're the gatherer, and so I can't have a program that is going to put everybody in the same box and say, you've got to have, quote, a real job in order to be a Medicaid beneficiary. So are there accommodations that acknowledge that in certain areas where you do not have employment opportunities, that you don't have to move to the city in order to do that? A city that may be 300 miles away and only accessible by an airplane. And so some of the things that we're talking about are the barriers to being able to comply with requirements that could work to bend that curve, if you will. Does it get us all the way home? No. And this is why you're looking at many different proposals. Provider taxes have been a real hot button in many areas. For many states, this has been a significant boon and help to the hospitals. Alaska is the one state out of the 50 that doesn't have provider taxes. But if you were to completely eliminate provider taxes, you wouldn't be necessarily cutting Medicaid to that Medicaid beneficiary, but you would save a lot of money. But what does that do in those states where they have come to rely on these payments? So there are many areas where I think we can look to how we can address or how we can put in place reforms that won't impact the benefits that the beneficiary receives. But what we have to be very cognizant of, and certainly in my state we are, is when you push things to the states, if the states are not in a position to provide for to be able to pick up the cost share What they may do is make the decision to push that individual off of Medicaid. Then you have to ask the question, well, isn't that cutting benefits for a beneficiary? And these are the real live considerations that we're wrestling with right now, because that individual doesn't get any less sick just because they're not on Medicaid. It means that they're probably going to end up delaying their care and then ultimately going to the emergency room and then costing everybody that much more. So there are no easy answers to this. And particularly when you're talking about a program that has been so important, again, to the most vulnerable.
Senator, you've been one of the few members of the Republican caucus willing to speak up against the president when you think it's necessary. I wonder, what is the mood within the caucus? You recently mentioned how people do get threats when they speak up against the president. Have you talked to colleagues that have been unwilling to stand up for the president under certain issues because they are worried about the type of threats that they might get, threats that you have gotten for speaking up against the president?
Well, I want to make clear, because I don't think I don't think it's accurate to say that that President Trump has threatened me in a sense where where I have felt violated. Have there been some times where he's called me names? You know, she doesn't really know her state. She's a loser. I don't find that threatening. I don't find it necessary, but I don't find it threatening.
Right behind
Yeah,
here, I have a framed tweet of when the president tweeted that I was a loser. So I don't find that threatening either. But I'm wondering what that stirs up amongst maybe some of his supporters, where they take that, and is that the threats that you're talking about? Maybe some of his supporters take it in a different way.
Well, and again, we don't know how the supporters may take it. But I'm very cautious right now, given the political environment that we are in, just what we saw in Minnesota this past week, where you're talking about real threats that led to political violence, basically to an assassination of elected leaders. And so I want to try to make a distinction about some of the back and forth that goes on when you're trying to get somebody to either come over to your side or do something your way, and maybe you call them things like losers. Maybe you have private conversations with them that are pretty direct. That's not unusual. That's not unexpected in just the rough and tumble of politics. It's when there is that fear of not political retribution in the sense of I'm going to primary you. That's, quite honestly, that's something that that you pretty much live with every day as a politician anymore. You're saying something, it's like, well, okay, now I'm gonna field a primary opponent. That should not be what guides everything that comes out of your mouth or every decision. I certainly hope not. If you can't have more fidelity to what's in front of you rather than am I gonna bring out opposition to my views and thus have a harder election. That's the process here. What I worry about is I think what you're kind of hinting to, Jamie, and that is that through words it incites actions by others. And in fairness, that was one of the reasons that I voted to impeach President Trump, because I felt his words incited the actions of others, which led to, I call it an insurrection on our Capitol. We saw deaths from that day, and I didn't feel that the president upheld his oath to the Constitution by attempting to stop that when his words could have stopped it. And so We're at that point in a political environment where our words have to be carefully chosen.
I'm glad you mentioned January 6th and your vote against that. I wonder, what is the mood and how do members of the Republican caucus view that day now? And I ask that because you voted against Kash Patel. He seemed almost comically unqualified for the job. He was a producer of the January 6th choir that President Trump opened his song with. I mean, it almost makes light of what occurred on January 6th. And yet he got enough votes, most votes in the Republican caucus. Do people within the caucus no longer view January 6th as a major issue now that President Trump was reelected, of something that we should look back with regret on, or a minor incident? How do members of your caucus, obviously you view it very seriously, but how do other members of your caucus now view that day?
It's hard for me to speak of what other members think about it. I can just tell you that we were all there. We were all there together at the same time in the same chamber. You cannot unsee what we saw. And so for those who choose not to speak about it now, I suppose that is their choice. But when I see comments that January 6th just really wasn't that big of a deal, it causes me to kind of wind back in my own head to that day when I don't think there was a single member, Republican or Democrat, who was saying, "Oh, this is not a big deal. This is not okay."
Let me ask you a Senate question. I know we only have a few minutes left. You're still young and vibrant, but there's always been a question of whether we've seen some examples in the recent years of some senators get to an age where they don't seem necessarily capable of doing the job. The Senate has been accused of allowing people to stay too long. Not that Senator Grassley is not capable, but he is over 90 now. He's chairing the committee looking into the fitness of the last president, whether he was capable of doing the job. Do you believe there should be an age limit to how long you can serve in the Senate?
Do I think there should be an age limit? I've watched some of my colleagues that have gotten older, in their 80s, who are as sharp as the first time I met them. What I see is that physically it's harder. Your body kind of wears down, slows down when you're in your late 80s and your 90s. And this is a very physically demanding job. I know how much it physically takes out of me. It's not just the day-to-day schedule. It's the amount of travel that goes on that is just physically taxing. And when your body's tired, my mind anyway, is not as sharp. And so I look at it, everyone needs to recognize the value that you bring to the table. And if you feel like you can't be giving 100% physically, mentally, then I think we need to make those decisions for the right reasons to move aside and let others step in. And I think that decision needs to be left to them. But I will tell you what happens, and I have seen this with far too many of my colleagues. They knew that physically, maybe mentally, the wear was accumulating, and they sought to leave. And it was their parties that said, "Oh, you cannot leave. You can't step down, because then we're going to have an open seat. We're going to have to spend way too much money to defend it. You have to stay in because your seniority, you're going to be able, you've got money in the bank, you will be able to get reelected, and we will keep power. We will keep control." And they do it at the expense of good people who deserve to have the dignity and respect to leave on their own terms. And instead, we squeeze them until there is nothing left. And when I say we, it is our process, this process that says it's more important to have the majority. It's more important to have that control. We don't care if we're wheeling you around in a wheelchair, or if the late night votes just completely knock you out. That is not right. It's not right to them as human beings. And in fairness, it's not right to their constituents either, because they're not able to give and be the best that they can be. So you've asked a fair question if there should be an age limit. And I am suggesting to you that we don't necessarily need to name that age. We should let the member determine when it is best. But then when they make that decision, respect it, and don't apply that level of pressure to just stay in because we need that body. Respect
Let me
them.
Let me close with this question, Senator. We've had two professors on the podcast in the last few months. One, Harvey Mansfield, the famous conservative professor, who is 90 some years old now. He is concerned about the direction of Trump and what he's doing to democracy, but he, I think, ultimately believes that America will get through it, and I guess he's not, the threat level is not the highest it could be. We also had Professor Larry Diamond from Stanford, who's an expert on democracy, who probably couldn't see the threat level as higher in terms of what he's seeing the president do to law firms, to kind of quelch journalism and the threats that he made. Where do you stand on the concerns about democracy and the president's actions? Are you closer to Larry Diamond, where the threat level is as high as it could be, or are you closer to Harvey Mansfield, who sees it as a threat but believes that ultimately America will muddle through?
Well, I definitely see it as a threat, and I believe that it is as high as I have seen it. I don't think it's as high as it could be, and we want to keep it from being as high as it could be. I am like the eternal optimist. It's no joke. Even my blood type is B positive, and I'm that type of a person. And so I just inherently believe that we're going to muddle through this. We're going to come out on the other side of this okay, because we are the United States of America. We are the greatest country out there. We are being tested in a way that I surely have never seen, and I never anticipated that I would see. But I believe that that we will have the wisdom and the strength to correct our direction. I have to believe that. Otherwise, I wouldn't want to get up in the morning and go to work. But we are at a place that I've never seen.
Senator Lisa Murkowski, thank you for joining the Dispatch podcast.
Thank you. Good to be with you.